there, and welcome to our revision session on Anglo-Saxon and Norman England. We're going to have a quick whistle-stop tour through all the sort of highlights of this. This is not the sum total of everything you will need to know for an exam on this topic, but it's certainly a good start. So the period we're looking at covers about 1060 to 1087 and is full of important people, events and changes. So we're going to use this time to rapidly review the key content, and the four main areas that we're going to look at today are late Anglo-Saxon society, who is in charge, the succession crisis and the battles of 1066, and the Norman conquest, establishing control, followed by the Normanization of England, so the change that happens during this time period. So just quickly, the exam question types that you get on this paper. You have two describe one key feature of questions for a total of 4 marks. You have one explain why question to answer, and one statement how far do you agree question, which is worth 16 marks. But you do get a choice of question for that one. So if we have a little look at Anglo-Saxon society, it is a pretty structured hierarchy. So we can see there we've got the king at the top, followed by the witan, earls, thanes, churls, peasants and slaves. So we do have the king at the top of the hierarchy, but his power is limited. So the real power lies with the 4 most important earls, particularly Harold Godwinson. But we'll have a quick rundown of the structure. So we have the king at the very, very top. In theory, he is the most powerful, but he is limited because he relies on powerful earls, for example, to give him troops in times of war. Followed by that, we have the witan. So the witan is a council of powerful lords and bishops who advise the king, and perhaps most importantly for what we're looking at, they choose the next king. The king is at liberty to ignore the witan for advice that they give him, but generally they do tend to get their way. The earls govern large areas of land. There's only 5 of them in England at this time, and they also control the fyrd, so the local armies, and collect taxes. Then we have the thanes. So these are our trained soldiers, that are also known as housecarls. These guys are used to defend the earls and the king, and these are local landholders as well. Underneath them, we have the churls. So these guys are free peasants. They are able to move around to find work. Unlike the peasants, who are not free to move around, and they have to stay on their lord's land unless they are given specific permission to leave. At the very, very bottom of Anglo-Saxon society, we have slaves. These guys are not free at all. They are owned by another person, which mostly is pretty negative, but weirdly does mean they would be punished less harshly than a peasant for committing the same crime, as it would be seen as damaging someone else's property if you were to do sort of physical harm to a slave. Take 5 minutes now, and let's see what you can recall about Anglo-Saxon society. So just sort of brainstorm everything down. These can either be from what we've covered here or from knowledge that you already have. Just take 5 minutes and I'll meet you back here for the next section. Hey, welcome back. So we're sticking with Anglo-Saxon society, but we're going to have a look at the legal system next. So the Anglo-Saxon legal system, in the early part / before our time period, worked on a system of blood feuds, where essentially if you committed a crime against a person, that person or their family, depending on if you killed them or just mortally injured them, were able to take revenge on you or your family. And this creates just a system of families getting back at each other constantly. So this is replaced eventually with the weregild. So the weregild is a slightly different system where if you commit a crime against someone, you are expected to pay compensation to them or their family, and that would depend on the severity of the crime, but also the rank that they had in society. So if we jump back to this, committing a crime against an earl will incur a higher fine than committing a crime against a churl, for example. There are some other elements to the legal system as well. So we don't just have the weregild, we also have the hue and cry and tithings. So the hue and cry is the obligation of every villager to raise the alarm and chase a criminal if they see a crime being committed. And if you don't join in with that, if you do not help with the hue and cry and catch the criminal, you could be punished yourself. Similarly, a tithing, this is a group of 10 men all over the age of 12 who are legally responsible for each other's behaviour. So if one member of the tithing was accused of a crime, the others would have to make sure he turned up for court. If they ran away, they would be forced to pay the weregild themselves. So these both sort of work on this idea of like collective responsibility. Take another 5 minutes now and explain why the Anglo-Saxon legal system after the change to the weregild is effective. Just want one little paragraph just to kind of explain why that is useful. And I'll meet you back here in just a second. Okay, so welcome back. We're going to move on from Anglo-Saxon society now to the interesting bit, the bit that everyone likes, in 1066. So Edward the Confessor dies in January of 1066, and the English throne is up for grabs. He leaves no obvious heir, he doesn't have any children, and he seems to tell everyone that they're allowed to be king after him. At least 3 of the claimants were told specifically by Edward that they could be king. So what we've got on the screen here are our 4 main claimants to the throne, and it is worthwhile knowing what their claim to the throne is and having an opinion on whether you think they were a good choice. So we'll start with Edgar Atheling, or Edgar the Atheling, depending on where you see it written. So his claim is based on the fact that he is the great nephew of Edward the Confessor. He is related to him. The problem is his claim is not very good because he's really, really young. Estimates are between 14 and 16 for this sort of time period. He has no experience. He doesn't have the following of an army. He's not run a place before. He is a very, very poor choice. Next we have Harold Godwinson, who is again named by Edward as his successor, and he is a very, very strong earl in England. He has a lot of leadership experience. He is supported by the Witan, and he's actually richer than the previous king was in any case. Next up we have Harald Hardrada. He's our Viking, and based on a secret deal between the previous king and the King of Norway, he has a claim to the English throne. He is a very, very strong leader, and he's potentially a really good choice for this. And then we have William of Normandy. So he claims that Edward promised him the throne in 1051, and that Harold had sworn a sacred oath, so sworn on particular relics, to support him in 1064. Now the only record we have of that, is the Bayeux Tapestry, and obviously that's a little bit of a questionable source. So he has a pretty reasonable claim. He is backed by the Pope, though, which gives quite a lot of psychological advantage going into battle, because he does get to take a papal banner with him, which is a little flag that says, "I am supported by the Pope." So that would make the English question whether they should be attacking William, because everyone is very, very religious at this time. What the Pope says is very, very important. So I want you to take 5 minutes now and explain, based on just what is on here, not knowing what happens afterwards, which claimant had the best claim to the throne and why. So 5 minutes, take your time, and I'll see you back here in a second. Hi there, welcome back. So the bit that everyone likes now, this is the fighting in 1066. So you need to have the order correct for these. So we have Gate Fulford, Stamford Bridge and Hastings. So we'll give a quick whistle-stop tour of these as a little reminder of what happens. So Gate Fulford happens when Harold Hardrada defeats Edwin and Morcar just outside of York in a village called Fulford. After the battle, crucially, he sends some of his troops and his armour back to his ships, which are on the River Ouse, for security. So he leaves them there. The rest of his troops stay with him, and they are celebrating their victory and waiting for hostages when Harold gets notification from someone presumably running the length of the country that this has happened, and he marches north to Stamford Bridge. So he takes the third and some households with him to defeat Hardrada and his own brother Tostig, who he has issues with from previous revolts against Tostig. This is the one with the Viking on the bridge, where you have the English held back at a bridge for a really long time by this one Viking who is then stabbed through the slats of the bridge. This then allows the English troops across the river, and they defeat the Norwegians pretty soundly. It leaves Harold's army exhausted and out of position. They are no longer in the south. So then, days after Stamford Bridge, William lands on the south coast. He lands at Pevensey and stays there and starts to attack Wessex to directly provoke Harold. So he makes his way all the way back down south. It's about 250 miles, and he does this at incredible speed. So the reasons for William's victory at Hastings, his troops are very tired. The fighting happens on a hill, which creates some interesting dynamics. Initially, the Normans really struggle to get the horses up the hill, so they sort of bring everyone down. And the English really rely on a shield wall tactic. Shield walls are very, very defensive. They are not very offensive. They're not great for attacking other people. William also utilises the feigned retreat, so his cavalry pretend to run away and then swing round to get back through the line, which has been broken. This works particularly well because Harold's army is mostly made up of third at this point, who are less well trained. Now, for this in particular, it is very, very important that you know what order these events happen in to be able to effectively talk about them. So I want you to take a couple of minutes now, a few bullet points for each one in chronological order. Make your notes on Gate Fulford, then Stamford Bridge, then Hastings. And to help you remember each one, I want a little icon next to it to represent that battle. And I'll see you back here in a couple of minutes. Okay, welcome back again. So now we're going to have a little look at how William keeps control of England, and there are multiple things that he does. So the big thing he does initially is he builds lots and lots of castles across England. He builds hundreds of them only a day's ride apart from each other, so that he has this really key network of bases of attack and defence. He even brings bits of wooden castle with him when he invades England, so that he can start building them immediately. The other thing he does is he introduces the feudal system, which creates a very, very strict and rigid hierarchy in England, which keeps everyone in their place. Following the revolt of Edgar the Atheling in the north, in which Robert Cumin dies, he also carries out the harrying of the north. So the harrying of the north, he sends troops northwards and they attack anything and everything that they find. So people are killed left, right and centre. Crops are burnt, villages are burnt to the ground, livestock is killed, and perhaps most importantly, salt is ploughed into the earth so that nothing grows in that area for about a period of 10 years. And we only say 10 years because roughly 10 years after that we have the Domesday Book, and this is where we have a record of everyone that lives in England. Now this gives a great sense that people are being watched by William, but it also gives him the knowledge that he needs to be able to run the country. So he knows who owes him knight service and he knows who owes him what money. The March of Earldoms are also quite effective for this because they give the earls a little bit more responsibility. So these are a really good way to reward his particularly loyal followers, which is why it's problematic when we get to the revolt of the earls later. And they also allow him to keep Wales under wraps as well, to keep them under control. So I want you now take another 5 minutes, I know, 5 minutes all the time, to explain which you think was the most effective method of control. Just one paragraph on this. This is a potential and previous 16-mark question, and just generally critically thinking about the impact a factor has is really, really effective for helping you not only to understand all of these, but also to practice the skill of prioritising ideas. That is absolutely crucial for your 16-mark questions. So, a couple of minutes now. Which of these was the most effective method of control? Okay, so we're going to keep going and have a little look at the Normanization of England. So he doesn't just control England, he fundamentally changes the fabric of England. So one of the key things that is changed is the role of the church. So Normans are appointed to key church positions throughout this time, most notably Lanfranc, who replaces Stigand as the Archbishop of Canterbury, which is the most important position in the English church. And he makes huge changes to the church. He really encourages the monastic tradition because he loves monasteries and monks. He gets rid of simony, which is this act of paying for church positions. He gets rid of pluralism, which is where you can hold more than one bishopric at a time, just to avoid this kind of conflict of interests. He reduces the impact of nepotism, so people giving jobs to their friends and family. He also insists on celibacy for his priests, sort of across the land, something that hadn't previously been particularly well upheld in the Anglo-Saxon church. So if we just have a look at the key differences here. So we have the Anglo-Saxon church. It is very independent, sort of locally, which gives a lot more freedom for priests to say what they like. Obviously, William doesn't want this. He wants priests to be giving a consistent message that he is the true and rightful king of England. A lot of Anglo-Saxon church services delivered in Anglo-Saxon. Clergy often married, they had very limited training, often can't read still. Small buildings under the Anglo-Saxon church, their connection to Rome is not that important. The king chooses the bishops, and it is very much about the sort of community of it. Under Lanfranc, though, it is more centralised, so everyone's getting the key message. Latin is emphasised more. Priests are required to be celibate. There is an increased focus on education and discipline. Remember, we talked about that monastic tradition as well. He really emphasises that, which produces a lot of good sort of texts and things. Very large stone cathedrals. This is partly as a result of sort of devotion, but also William's guilt for the harrying of the north. He very much feels terrible about doing this and builds a lot of cathedrals as penance. Strengthens ties to Rome. They are still loyal to the king, but there is a more formal church hierarchy. And this is both a spiritual and political move. So he is supporting Norman control. He is helping to keep William in his position of power. We're going to move on to just look at one last little section here. And this is the revolt of the Earls. So the revolt of the Earls happens in 1075. And the key thing with the revolt of the Earls is that this represents the first time where we see Normans rebelling against William as well. So there are lots of revolts before this. There's Edwin and Morcar, there's Edgar the Atheling, and there's the revolt of Hereward the Wake. And all of these are Anglo-Saxons who were upset that William has taken over. This is key because as part of the revolt of the Earls, you get Norman Earls rebelling against William. So what this symbolises is that William is no longer just a foreign power who has issues with the people he has taken over. He is now upsetting his own earls, and that is causing issues for him. Now, I hope you found this useful. Like I said, this is not the sum total of what you should be doing for your Anglo-Saxon and Norman revision, but hopefully it's a good starting point for you. As always, practice your exam questions. If you need anything else, have a look on the Edexcel website and see if you can find any useful past papers. But I hope your exam revision is going well, and I will see you all soon. Thank you.